Okay, that's great. That's started. Okay, that's great. So as usual for our webinars, microphones will remain muted while speakers are presenting, but we really encourage you to use the chat throughout the session. So please use the chat function if reflections or questions come up. What I tend to do is if you do have a question, we do have a dedicated time at the end of our conversation where we can open up that space for questions. But please pop them in the chat as and when we're going through the questions. So for those joining this series for the first time, this session is part of our In Conversation webinar series, which brings together partners, practitioners and stakeholders to share understanding, build connections and learn from each other's experiences. And before we go any further, I would also really like to thank the Armed Forces Covenant Fund Trust, whose support has made this work possible. This webinar forms part of a wider piece of work linked to our early years project, First Steps, and the project focuses on supporting military families in the early years by developing training for practitioners, helping them better understand the experiences and challenges and families. What's really important is that this training is being co-produced with both and practitioners, so it's really ensuring that it reflects lived experience as well as professional knowledge. And conversations like today's with Dandelion Military Families are incredibly valuable in helping to inform that work. And that brings us really nicely to the focus of today's session. So today we are shining a light on the work of Dandelion Military Families and the experiences of military parents. I'll give you a very quick overview of what who Dandelion Military Families are, but I'm sure Lindsay and Hannah will go into a lot more depth about that in a second. So Dandelion Families is a peer support network created specifically for military parents. Through their work, they provide connection, advocacy, and a platform for the voices and experiences of military families. And they've created a space where parents can speak openly about the realities of military life and feel less alone in navigating its challenges. And today's session is an opportunity to hear directly from Lindsay and Hannah to better understand the experiences of Armed Forces parents and to think together about how practitioners and services can support families in ways that are responsive and informed. And before we move into the conversation, I also just want to briefly acknowledge the importance of trauma-informed practice. So some of the topics we touch on today relate to family life, parenting pressures, separation and uncertainty. And for some people, these discussions may resonate with their own experiences, so that we really do ask everyone to approach the conversation with care and respect. And before we hear from our speakers, I wanted just to briefly share why the work of Dandelion Families resonates so strongly with many military parents. And like many people in this space, I'm part of a military family, which means navigating the rhythms and unpredictability that come with military life. And this is the reason I kind of got in touch with Lindsay, because the Dandelion Families have really been a great support. And a few years ago, when we were posted to Northern Ireland, a friend introduced me to them. And at that time, my husband was deployed frequently. And like many partners, I was doing what many military parents do. So keeping everything running at home, parenting, work, routines, nursery and school runs, dinner on the table, all everyday things that keep family life moving. And from the outside, things probably looked fine, and I felt they looked fine as well, but there were moments that could feel quite isolating. And what really stood out to me about Dandelion Military Families was how their social media posts, and I know we spoke about that just before we came online there, they really created a sense of recognition and connection. And they captured feelings and experiences that many military parents carry, but don't always have the language or space to talk about. And sometimes it was simply the reassurance that other families were navigating the same challenges, the relocations, the long stretches of solo parenting, and the uncertainty that can come with deployments. And that reminder that you're not the only one feeling that way can make such a huge difference. And again, I just wanted to pick up on a post that they shared a couple of days ago. So that came through again yesterday. Given the current global climate, they captured something that many military families may be quietly carrying right now. And if you don't mind, I'd just like to share a part of it. And the quote that they popped up was, "If you ask me, how are you? I'd probably say I'm doing all right. And I mean it. On the surface, we're functioning. The kids are fine, work is ticking along, dinner gets made, life carries on. But if you ask me on a deeper level, I'd tell you I'm worried about the state of the world. I'm worried about what rising tensions mean for families like ours. I'm worried about how global headlines quietly land in our home in a way they don't always for others. Because when you're a part of a military family, world events don't just feel like news, they feel personal. You start reading between the lines, you notice the tone of conversations, you sense the just in case planning before it's spoken out loud. So yes, I'm all right, but I'm also carrying the quiet weight of what ifs. And I know we're not the only family doing that right now. And when I read that, it really struck me because it articulates something that can be really difficult to explain. That for military families, world events often land a little differently. There's often an extra layer of awareness and uncertainty alongside everyday life. And that's exactly why spaces like Dandelion Military Families matter so much, because conversations about parental mental health are incredibly important, not only for parents themselves, but for the well-being of our wee people too, and our young people as well. And that brings me really nicely into introducing our wonderful speakers today. So first, we're joined by Lindsay, who is a director and co-founder of Dandelion Military Families. Lindsay is a military spouse and mother of 3 and has spent more than 13 years living within military life, navigating multiple relocations and the unique realities that come with that lifestyle. Lindsay is also a nurse and health visitor by background, and her professional work has long focused on supporting families in the early years. She is currently completing a PhD, exploring the perinatal mental health lived experiences of non-serving British Army mothers, research that brings together both her professional expertise and her lived experience of military life. Her work is particularly focused on issues of voice, power, and access to care, exploring how military families experience support systems and where gaps in understanding or provision can exist. And through both her research and her work with Dandelion Military Families, Lindsay is helping to ensure that the voices of military mothers are heard and recognised within policy, practice and services. And she was very busy yesterday as well, which I'm sure she might touch upon later on. We're also joined by Hannah, who is also a director and co-founder of Dandelion Military Families. Hannah is a military spouse and mother of 3 with 16 years of lived experience navigating military life, including frequent relocations and long periods of separation while her partner was deployed. And before military life and motherhood made it difficult to continue in the same role, Hannah spent more than a decade working as a director of sales and client relationships within the construction industry, leading teams and managing client partnerships. And her work with Dandelion Military Families is deeply personal. Hannah pours an enormous amount of energy and commitment into improving the experiences, visibility, and support networks available to military families, driven by a determination that other families should not have to face the same barriers, isolation, and gaps in support that she and her family experienced. In the past 2 years, she has also transitioned out of military housing. No more magnolia walls, although they are allowing more colours now, aren't they? And into her own home, so gaining first-hand experience of what it can feel like when families move away from formal military systems and communities and the challenges that come with that shift. So together, Lindsay and Hannah have created the Dandelion Military Families, a space that connects parents, amplifies lived experience and strengthens support networks for military families. So I'm really delighted that they are both here with us today. And with that, we'll get started with our conversation. So thank you so much, Lindsay and Hannah, for joining us. So Lindsay, I'll start with you. I think it'd be really good for us just to talk about who Dandelion Military Families are, what they do, and what was kind of the catalyst for creating the support for your organisation.
Okay, thank you for inviting us and for setting up the webinar today. Before I do that, I should also add that Becky is also one of our fellow directors and co-founders, and she also pours an awful lot of time, experience, and her own expertise into what we do as well. So it was important to mention that. But primarily, Dandelion Military Families is principally a peer support network for military parents focused on parental mental health. We are here for members of the tri-service community, irrespective of serving status, rank, branch, location, and circumstance. And at the heart of why we exist is to really create a space where military parents can have honest conversations about the mental and emotional realities of parenting alongside military life. And where relevant, we've also engaged in advocacy work. We're members of the Maternal Mental Health Alliance and the National Maternity and Neonatal Collective, which is kind of the work you were referencing that I was engaged with yesterday. And really the importance of that is in helping to raise awareness outside of the military community of the unique challenges that military parents face. I'd kind of say that the main catalyst for creating DMF was our own lived experiences. We weren't seeing the open and honest conversations about the mental and emotional difficulties of being a parent within the context of military life in the mainstream, and each of us recognised how important those conversations were, particularly through our own lived experiences and struggles with parental mental health. Ultimately, we found support in each other and in the small circles of parents that we're surrounded with. But we wanted to create something that enabled the same connection and understanding for others, basically.
Yeah. And did you just feel that it just wasn't spoken about, that you were just kind of slotted into this role and that you just kind of had to get on with it in a sense? So
yeah, absolutely. I often describe it as feeling like I was navigating my own experiences without a map. Military services understood military life, civilian services understood parental mental health, but as military parents, we have one foot in each camp, and it can make you feel like you don't always have the representation or the translator or the advocate that helps you to make sense of your own experiences or bridge that divide. And so DMF really was to try and bridge that gap and sit in that messy middle space. And facilitate that conversation so that other people could feel seen, and also we did in our own experiences.
Yeah, and I think that is a really important. It's wonderful that you've created that space, because I think when you do join a military you enter into the armed forces as a family. I think there is certainly from my point of view, is like, yes, this is great, we'll just get on with it, and that kind of attitude filters home if you're in the community, and I think that does come across. So it's just wonderful that space was created, and like I was saying at the start, just your posts just to even add a bit of humour to it sometimes, and not be as serious about it. So yeah, so it's wonderful that the space was created. You spoke about obviously having that little group. What was the importance of it being peer-led? Why was that so important for you?
It was really important for us that DMF was peer-led. I think peer support is often an underestimated tool of support. It's non-hierarchical. Peers, provide support alongside, and not from a position of authority or, imposing from above. And that can make support feel less stigmatizing and far more accessible, particularly you know, in some of those topics that people maybe find are a bit more taboo or difficult to talk about. And I think, unfortunately, mental health still has an element of that. And the reality is that we're not an alternative to professional support, but we see ourselves as part of the scaffold around it. And that's particularly important at a time when professional services feel strained and fragmented. And so having that understanding and informed peer support can make a real difference in helping parents feel seen and validated, and then confident about seeking further help if they need it. And I think it was also, what struck me is that it's also been really important for parents who are finishing professional support, because there's a transition period that kind of happens afterwards, where you might no longer be receiving regular appointments or access to that professional support, but you're still processing, you're still adjusting. And peer support can offer that sense of continuity and community, so that you're not suddenly moving from having all of that support and structure to then navigating things alone again. So ultimately, it was about creating space where people could feel understood by others who genuinely got it, and principally because they're living it too.
Yeah. Excellent. Yeah. And I think that that's such that continuity and the amount of transitions that you go through as a military family, it's fantastic that it is based on peer support, and that space is there.
I think it keeps us on it. I think it keeps us honest as well, because it means that we've got that constant feedback mechanism of, you know, things are so dynamic in the military space that you've constantly got that almost ear to the ground, because that peer work is just conversations that are happening all the time. And so from that, you can begin to pick up and identify some of the emergent problems, and address those quicker, because you've got your ear to the ground a bit more.
And is the peer support mainly offered online, like through your social media posts, or do you have dedicated people that would speak to certain people, or is it mainly just through your online community, which is fab? It's got lots of following.
It's principally online, and I think the reason for that is because we recognise that, you know, military family life makes it really difficult to access some of the in-person stuff. So actually, I think even if we weren't to offer online, a hybrid approach as the bare minimum would be really important in terms of support, because that reflects, you know, how difficult it can be for families to access support, because maybe it's at a certain time and you're working, and so therefore you can't go, or you can't get the childcare because a lot of us are not, you know, living nearby family and support networks. So actually having that online space gives people access that they perhaps don't have elsewhere. And I think that's also particularly true, or has proven particularly true, for those who are maybe relocated abroad and feel slightly disconnected from the motherland, if you like, and all of the support services that exist there. They kind of feel a bit more out on the fringes. And so having that online links brings them back into the fold a bit. So having the online space, I don't think kind of works in a practical sense, but then also, you know, in that exposure and visibility sense too.
And I know we picked on up at the start, just I was mentioning, I love how your posts appear every morning at 7 a.m. and it's the peak time for mad morning rush. It's just wonderful, because it's a wee snippet and it just gives you that reassurance, and you see the comments from other parents, and you actually say, oh yeah, that's how I'm feeling today, and other people comment on it, and it's just so simple but so effective. Yeah, just kudos to you for doing that it's pretty much every morning, isn't it? You've got a nice little post, so which is wonderful. But yeah, so it's a great thing that you're doing online. So we'll move on to our next theme. So now that we kind of understand what Dandelion Military Families offers, let's just talk more about the realities that military families are facing. And I know I touched upon that in the introduction. So I know we spoke about this when we first met, Lindsay, but becoming a parent, especially for the first time, can be incredibly rewarding, but also very challenging. And then when you put on top of this being part of an armed forces family, what this can make it much harder. So why is it harder for armed forces families? And just thinking about that very early childhood when you've had your first baby. So why is it quite harder for armed forces families?
Yeah, I think the important thing to say is that we now recognise that becoming a parent more generally is a period of vulnerability, emotionally, physically, psychologically, but that just military life adds an additional kind of textural layer to that, if you like. There can be geographic mobility, separation due to deployment or training, or living unaccompanied. Many families are living far from extended family support networks. That lack of consistent community can amplify feelings of isolation, particularly in the early days of parenting when reassurance and practical support matter so much. There's also just the general unpredictability of military life. I'm probably speaking to the converted here because a lot of the audience will be military connected. But plans change, routines are disrupted, and that can feel especially destabilizing when you're already adjusting to what is a huge identity shift in parenthood. I think that for some, there can also be cultural factors. I think historically we've had a very strong ethos of self-sufficiency and reliance and independence, and all of that is really great and a real strength. But it's important to say that that is making it harder for some people to say, I'm struggling. And when you combine that, those pressures of military life with parent life, it can feel overwhelming. And none of this takes away from how fulfilling military life can feel, but it does mean that for the military parents that we speak to, they're often navigating both the universal challenges of becoming a parent and the unique demands of service life at the same time. And it creates this very strange fusion effect that sits heavy mentally and emotionally.
Yeah.
I know that from my own personal experiences of becoming a military parent, they've been quite bumpy and mixed. And historically, I've been very open about that. Personally, I relocated within 12 weeks of a traumatic birth with my first child. And then with my second baby, I relocated at 36 weeks pregnant and had a cesarean section at 39 weeks. And then for all of my babies, I solo parented for decent stints well into the early postpartum period. And each of those experiences had a significant effect on my mental and emotional well-being, as well as practical impacts on how I was able to access support. For example, for my traumatic birth and birth injury, all of the care fell away. Access to all of the support that was set up for me, down in the south of England, disappeared as soon as I moved up to the north of England. And that was really disorientating period of time, and navigating recovery, new motherhood and military mobility all at once was a lot. And I felt like the system around me understood part of the picture, but rarely the whole of the picture, the whole of how that experience is embodied, how it lives within your nervous system. And I think for me, that was what set me on this journey, is that people need to understand those parts. And I think that's kind of definitely influenced DMF. And I think Hannah would say the same. Our lived experiences aren't separate from it. They're kind of woven into it because we understand and have lived through some of what many other military parents are telling us.
And at that time, Lindsay, so your support was very much from the military, your friends on the patch, or as it were, that's where you grasp most of your support from. I'm certainly thinking of situation, you know, certainly for me, I was very lucky and privileged that I had my family that could come down and support me. And to be honest, I really don't know how I would have got through those first few weeks without my mum being down there. And certainly I had a friend who didn't, unfortunately, didn't have that option, didn't have any close family, and her husband then deployed a week after the birth. So I think, yeah, it's just not that assumption that, oh, it's okay, they'll be fine. You know, they've just had a baby, they'll be fine. That's what happens in life. And I think that extra layer of, you know, separation, and even being in a community, I think that was a sense of loss as well for me. I remember being in a really strong community with lots of really good friends, and then moving so soon after, and you just lose, you know, you lose that sense of someone that you've bonded with and you're close with. And that can be really hard as well, having to reformulate those relationships and the toll that takes, and it's an effort to go and put yourself out of the house. I mean, some days obviously it's even a challenge to get dressed when you've just had a baby, but the fact that, you know, it's so important that you have to, when you are in a new community, you have to go out and try and make those connections, which will hopefully benefit your mental health. But it's such a challenge in itself. So I think that's a really important point. And obviously there are people who do have support, who are maybe fortunate enough to have that support, but not everyone does. And I think it is, like you say, the system does support that, but there are gaps, aren't there, like the wider picture. So yeah, I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Hannah, about you and your experience, or just how armed forces life can impact that.
I mean, much like Lindsay's first foray into motherhood, I had a slightly unpredictable start. I was living in Salisbury at the time, but we were being posted out, and I hadn't bought anything for the baby. I was like 32 weeks pregnant or whatever. I thought once we moved, that's when we'll get the nursery ready and everything, you know, thinking, I don't know, I should have known this as a military spouse. Planning anything is never do that. But we moved when I think it was on 33 weeks we'd moved, and obviously it was our first baby, so we moved with our dog. I mean, that was it. So life back then seems now much easier because it was just my husband and the dog. And having not obviously had any children before, I was well rested, and you know, I didn't think so at the time.
Can we remember those days? That was so long ago.
But we moved, and a week later, I just, in the middle of the night, my waters broke and I went into premature labour. Now, to put it into perspective, I hadn't even been to the hospital where we were now living. And we honestly had to Google where the hospital was. It's kind of like, it's a bit comedic now. At the time, it obviously wasn't so much so. But yeah, so we got to the hospital. Obviously, I didn't have a midwife. I had notes from where we used to live, which I was told were terrible. So, and I just went into kind of premature labour. And interestingly, the midwives later said that they have lots of occurrences of premature babies in military families, because, you know, not always with a cause, you know, it's not always due to an infection. It's sometimes just happens, obviously, you know, stress induced. It could be, obviously, we'd moved house. They say that's very stressful in normal civilian life. You know, that's one of the most stressful times. So I gave birth to my daughter. I was lucky. She was born dead on 34 weeks. And we were really lucky that she had minimal things wrong with her, but we still had to be in hospital until she was kind of more full-term kind of gestation, even though she'd been born, if that made sense. But my husband had to go back to work. So I was kind of sitting there with a newborn baby who was premature, so actually in an incubator. So happy that she was fine, you know, generally fine, tiny but fine otherwise. And And I myself remember thinking I didn't really have any emotion. I was like, I was happy that she was here, but I was also like, how can I be a mother now? She's supposed to still be, I'm not ready, you know, we don't have any stuff. I had nothing.
Still in boxes.
Yeah. And then off my husband went to work because he had to go to work because we'd just moved. So he'd started this new role and he couldn't not go in. And it was just very bizarre. And at the time, I just took it as, you know, that was what military life was like. And I appreciate, you know, when you need to be somewhere, you need to be somewhere. But actually looking back, you know, like you that's the type of experiences as military families that you just kind of take as a given, that, you know, that happened. I was lucky that he was in the country, that he was sleeping next to me in the night when I actually went into labour, because no part of me thought at 34 weeks that would be a kind of danger zone of potentially going into labour. Yeah, so that was my experience at, you know, first time motherhood, which, as you can imagine from that, 15 days in neonatal unit, then I came home, and it was a very different experience for me. It wasn't the kind of, you know, the picture holding your baby walking out of the hospital type thing. I felt like I'd missed a whole area of like first time motherhood that everyone else had got, and I couldn't really get my feelings around that. And I think for a long time I just thought that was the way you felt as a new mother. You're obviously so horrifically sleep deprived as well. It's, you know, but also the layer of being military. I was very, very, you know, I didn't really speak to anyone about not feeling normal like myself. And my husband was, you know, busy a lot of the time. Like for me, he wasn't deployed, unlike, you know, Lindsay had to deal with straight away, but he was deployed by the time she was 6 months old. And she looked like a 3-month-old baby because obviously she was so much tinier. And she didn't sleep, you know what baby does, but she really didn't sleep. So it was, so I then had to be a solo parent, still not really feeling myself, but having to essentially just make my way in life, you know, without my husband around and hoping for the best, you know. But like I say, like luckily she was healthy, but I don't think I faced that for a long time, interestingly, until probably really we set up DMF, and you kind of sit there and you think back to your own experiences, and you realize how that changed you as a person, or how you suppress so much to just get on with it, which is fine, and you have to. It's survival, isn't it? You can't just, you know, not look after your baby. But there are some people in crisis that really just can't look after their baby, and that, for myself and Lindsay and Becky, was one of the main reasons we all have had these different experiences in early parenthood. And, you know, we've gone on to have other children and had other experiences, not necessarily positively, you know, the second or third time round. And it was just knowing that had just happened to us. Like, it's bound to be happening to other people. And even if they had a particularly positive birthing experience, you know, motherhood as we know it, with the added layer of military life, you know that, you know, the rates of postnatal depression are so high in like civilian families anyway. And military families have got so much more pressure on their shoulders, and this age-old kind of, you know, keep calm, carry on, you know, we're a military family, obviously. It's what we signed up for. This is what we, you know, it's our dream. It's like, you know, in reality, we know we are just trying to survive, being good parents, you know, being there for our children who need the emotional support because they're, you know, mothers and fathers aren't there because they're serving. And it's, you know, it's a lot. So that is why there was a massive gap. We couldn't see anyone out there saying the words to us that we feel like we put out every day in our social media. So, and that is what drives us to do that, just to make one person feel normal or a little bit happy or can smile. Yes. That is what it's all about for us.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting just listening to you talking about that, and just your immediate reaction was just get on with it. That's what I've got to do. And I really do feel that is very much the feeling when and the fact that you had just moved to a brand new community patch as well. I mean, there's just so many things that you have to figure out, never mind raising your little baby, it's very isolating. So it's just great to have that space and to talk about it. So yeah, but that, I think that really does come through, that sense of, oh, it's fine, we'll just get on with it. You know, we're in the armed forces, it's fine, we'll all be fine, we'll just get on with it, because that's what we're supposed to do. And that's just kind of the expectation. So thank you so much for sharing that with us, Hannah. So just move on to the next section. And I just kind of want to focus in on the support, as you touched upon, Hannah, there, about creating that space. So what kind of support does Dandelion Military Families offer to Armed Forces families? So I know obviously we've spoken a lot about the online support, and what areas, I suppose, are parents most drawn to from your interaction with parents? And I'll pose that to Lindsay.
Yeah, I think, gosh, over the last 3 years, we've tried to offer a variety of different things. We've run book clubs, we've held online webinar events around common parenting challenges like sleep, weaning, breastfeeding. We've partnered with SANS, the National Baby Loss Charity, to facilitate baby loss support sessions that are specifically for military parents. We've also held an in-person baby loss commemoration event, which was just, I think, really meaningful for us and for the families involved. But I would say that principally our kind of bread and butter, if you like, the core of what we do is the one-to-one peer support, the consistent confidential space where someone can speak openly to another military parent who understands the context and, you know, is hopefully waving a great big green flag that says it's okay for you to be vulnerable here, without any sort of need for further explanation. And I think we've just really tried to adapt and to listen to what parents want, because I think different parents have wanted different things at different times based on their, you know, what's happening in their family life, what's happening in military life, and there's been various different pinch points. So for some families, that's been practical information and signposting them on to some of the formal and established support. But sometimes it's a sense of community. But yeah, what I would say is that principally a lot of people are drawn most to the one-to-one peer support and the non-judgmental kind of listening ear as a safer space to unload some of the emotional intensity that they've been carrying. I think we did a post not too long ago about it, but listening as care, it seems like a really simple thing, but actually a lot of what parents are saying to us is that sometimes they don't want people to fix things because they recognize that they can't be fixed. They just want to be able to speak about them honestly and in a way that is meaningful to them without, you know, somebody saying, well, have you thought about this? Or can I signpost you to that? And it's, you know, sometimes people just need the space to sit and articulate their experiences and to have somebody validate that. So what I would say is we've created group spaces before, and they can be really powerful, but I think parents are drawn to the one-to-one stuff because unfortunately there is still a sense of shame and stigma around struggling. I think as a parent in general, you know, you chose to be a parent and all that. But then particularly as a military parent, because, you know, we chose both those things. We chose parent life and we chose military life. And so, you know, you don't feel like you can complain about either, let alone about the synergistic effects of both. And so I think whilst the group stuff works, a lot of people are seeking out the one-to-one stuff first because they kind of, that helps them dip their toe in the water and kind of understand their experiences before feeling confident then to, you know, step out into wider spaces and have those same conversations. And then I think one of the things that surprised us most is, and you touched on it at the beginning, is the impact or significance seemingly of our social media posts and the way that people have engaged with them. I think we kind of did that initially, just kind of a bit of awareness raising, but it's kind of evolved over time into becoming almost a form of support itself, an opportunity for people to read a little about what they might see within their own experiences, or maybe inform them about how other people are experiencing it, and then other parents coming in the comments and saying it's not just you, I felt that as well. And
that's my favorite bit, just reading everyone's comments.
Yeah, and so that's really surprised us and has been really striking. And I think the reason for that is because online a lot of the positive parenting advice and highlights reels can feel really loud and sometimes really prescriptive. And so I think what people have valued in our posts, and this is the feedback they've given us, is that they feel validation and visibility when they're feeling most vulnerable and, in some of the experiences that aren't, Instagram worthy. And so that even if we haven't directly supported them, that just seeing their experiences reflected in that and how it's named and normalized has made them feel less alone. And sometimes just that sense of recognition is as important as the formal support.
Yeah. With the one-to-one peer support, how would a parent go about accessing that? Would they just simply get in contact with you and you would just link them up? Would it be someone in the community, or would it be an in-person, or is it mainly again online through a chat?
It's mainly online, and actually we find that a lot of parents want that, because of the flexibility, but then also because it can feel less confronting as well. It takes quite a lot of courage to have those in-person contacts, if you like. So what happens for most people is they get in contact with us either via our email, our website, our social media, and then we have a small pool of trained peer support volunteers who we link them up with. And those peer support volunteers will try to understand, okay, we're going to do a lot of this support virtually, if you like. How's the best way to do that for you? What's the best time to do that for you? Because a lot of parents are working now. And so, a peer support, meeting in the middle of the day is not going to be very supportive or helpful to somebody who's working and can't do that. So they'll make those negotiations with the peer support volunteer, and then they kind of take it from there. And our volunteers will come back to us for supervision purposes and things like that, if and when they need it. And that support will last as long or as short as the parent feels that they need.
Excellent. And I'll make sure obviously to pop all that information at the end of I can send it out in a follow-up email, so it's really good to know. I know, Lindsay, when we met at the start, and just obviously linking back to the project, Forces Children Scotland are involved in with regards to the early years training. Just thinking about this support for parents, how would you say that, how in what ways would you recommend professionals could do to better understand and respond to parents' needs and within military families?
Yeah, I think for me, it's less about what they need to know and more about the approach that they need to have. And I think when we spoke last time, that was kind of the summation of our conversation, wasn't it? Yeah. And it genuinely is about having a parent-centered approach, because the parent is typically the best advocate for their child and an expert in their lived experience. Professionals bring their own expertise, but parents have all of the context. Yeah. And when those two forms of expertise are treated as equal, outcomes are stronger. And I guess a vital part of that parent-centered approach is listening, not just listening to fix or listening to reply, but listening to hear and to understand. So it's less about the presenting issue and more about being curious about the wider picture. So in military life is incredibly diverse. No two services are the same, no two roles are the same, operational tempo is different, exposure to risk is different, patterns of separation. There is so much variability there, and the same is true for families. Every family has its own blend, different paths to parenthood. They might be experiencing neurodiversity, previous trauma, and have generally different strengths and vulnerabilities. So listening is really important, and also having a curiosity mindset. that really matters. So instead of assuming that you know what military life looks like, maybe ask them, what does service life look like for you right now? And that one question can generate a much fuller picture and richer understanding of what's happening for that family. And I think flexibility is also important too. Rigid systems don't work well for families whose lives are inherently mobile and unpredictable. So appointment structures, referral pathways, communication methods, where possible, all of these things need to be adapted to the realities of military life, and without adding further stress to it. And then I think finally, as another part of that approach, you have to see parents not as service users, but as partners. Because when parents feel respected, believed, and involved in decision making, it reduces stigma and it builds trust. And without that trust, you don't have effective support.
Yeah, really, really linking in to, you know, that strengths-based approach, you know, instead of thinking what's wrong to what's strong, and kind of just having that empathy. And it's quite interesting. So speaking to another parent last week, and you know, just that the pressures, her partner's currently away at the moment, and it's really difficult for her to access childcare, and it's just having that empathy, you know, if you are a bit late, not to go, oh, they're late again, or why are they continuously being late, just to have that safe space, I suppose, and really focusing in on that strength-based approach. I know we had Dr. Marg Rogers on in January, and she's got a whole module on that for parents and practitioners, and that's such an important point, Lindsay, you know, really just to really focus on the strengths and the partnership, to make sure that you've got a firm partnership with parents.
I think that's particularly important for military families. We spend an awful lot of time, what feels like an awful lot of time, being spoken to, directed at, and so in parent life, we need to have much less of that and much more of the partnership.
Yeah, definitely. So as we come towards, I feel like we could talk for such a long time, it's great. But as we you know, come towards the end of our conversation, it feels really valuable to pause and highlight the challenges of parenting while living unaccompanied. And I know we spoke about that a lot when we met. Something that we may not always consider, actually, going back to that idea of community and the community that you get from living on a patch and being near the base is so important, especially when you've just had a baby. So building on what we've heard about the support available, we'll now take a closer look at, you know, kind of what this experience is really like for parents raising children in these circumstances. And that's where I'm going to bring in Hannah, because that's exactly what Hannah's doing right at the moment, and me, I suppose, as well. So it's just so wonderful, Hannah, that you're able to give a bit of perspective on this. So what would you say, Hannah, having moved into living unaccompanied, you know, what are the biggest personal and emotional challenges faced by parents living out of the base, out of the patch? What would you say are the biggest challenges?
Well, firstly, I'd say that it was very much a grass is greener kind of situation for me. I was getting out of, you know, military housing. Whoop, we're going to move.
Did you go crazy with the colour palette? I did.
We're yet to, actually, it is a bit magnolia-y in some places, so don't judge. But yeah, for me, I think I was so focused on that transitioning. Like, you transition so much as military families, moving, you know, you're told where you're going to move to, you take the house and all of that, and then finally we'd chosen a place we were going to live. And I really hadn't thought that there would be such a big kind of emotional pull back to patch life once I'd moved out. And that is one of the things I would say. You may choose to. I mean, some people will always live unaccompanied, you know, often naval families. It just makes sense for them to be posted, you know, just offshore, you know, so they're kind of near to where their other halves are going to be, you know, away, but they're still potentially living in the same place they grew up. You know, that can happen. And then there's people like me who maybe have dabbled in, you know, living in military housing and then have been able to kind of come away from that. And I think the thing is that you're not ready ever for change, and it is a change, and it's a change that you don't even realize is going to affect you. You look at the positives, you think, right, we're going to have stability. That was my main thing. We're going to move, we're going to live in a place where certainly my youngest two will be able to go to a school, you know, a nursery, and then just follow what, you know, civilians do. And, you know, they get to go to the local school and they just move up like with all the other kids. They don't have to move, unlike my eldest, who had been to, you know, already been to a couple of schools. What I hadn't appreciated from my side was that I wasn't seeing neighbours that were like me, or people that were like me. You know, we moved from a place that was kind of 85% military children at the school. So when I'm dropping off my children to the school and the nursery, you're not seeing anyone in military uniform, whereas there would literally be a sea of camouflage humans dropping people off and going off on their bikes to the garrison, etc. Yeah. Living where I do now, that is gone. And again, that wasn't something that I thought would affect me emotionally or my children, interestingly, but it's something that my eldest, who is now 8, but when we moved here, you know, 2 years ago, all she'd ever known was military life and military schools. And it was the first time that she'd really thought of herself as different. You know, she was like, Mummy, why am I the only military child at my school? And, you know, compared to there being, you know, less civilians, you know, at her previous school. So there's such a big emotional factor to it. And I think it's really important not to assume that because someone's been able to or has always lived in their own house, that their life is easier in a way. Because my parents and my in-laws don't live close by to where we decided to settle. So I don't have, you know, I can't just be, you know, have, you know, nanny and granddad coming to help me out, which I'd love. And don't get me wrong, they help when they can. But it doesn't automatically give you then all that stability. Yes, my children have stability from an educational point of view, although, you know, I still had to get them into the schools, etc., as, you know, most do when we moved here. But it's kind of you can't assume that everything else is kind of like normal for a military family, because you ultimately are a military family. You know, the news this week, I have those same feelings, and that was part of the reason I wrote that post actually that you quoted, because, you know, on the face of it, I'm doing the school run, and not in the sea of mums and dads that I'm looking at, none of them are military, you know, and obviously they are viewing the news, thinking probably the same, you know, as you would do, being, you know, living in this country and seeing what's happening. But, you know, I'm looking at it from a very different point of view. I'm thinking of, you know, what it means for us, what it means for our friends, because we are military. Whether you take a military person out of like patch life and plonk them anywhere, you are still wedded to that. You know, you're institutionalized. And I felt like I'm not used to just kind of living in a place that isn't so full of, you know, military people. And I never thought I'd say that. I thought it would be a breath of fresh air, and it would be like, oh great, you know, you basically get to live a civilian life, but your husband still is in the military. You don't. You are still living at the whim of the military. You know, my husband's only just recently back from being deployed for 6 months, and that was very different, living surrounded by civilians and having a husband that's deployed and living in a place where there's a lot of co-parenting that goes on. The mums and the dads are involved in everything, and my children kind of being like, yeah, our dad's away, and people kind of turning going, what, 6 months, you know, like I couldn't even deal with 2 nights away, you know, and you're having to kind of just be like, yeah, that must be really tough, 2 nights. So yeah, it's a real change. So I'd say the biggest thing is the emotional side for the kids, because ultimately for a period of time before my husband was deployed, he only came back at the weekends because of where he was posted. It was too far away. So it's then, you know, I'm the default parent. You know, Monday to Friday, I am doing everything, and their dad is not around. And then dad comes back for this kind of not even 48 hours for the weekend. And your life's kind of, I mean, it's lovely having him back, but you're having to kind of navigate this weird.
Wanting to go away again.
Yeah. It's a really tough one. And, you know, there's people that will be like, oh, military spouses, they just moan about everything. I don't want to appear like I'm moaning, because I really appreciate the fact I have my own house. Although I will say, when something breaks, I have to pay to repair it. But there's this like, I'm not the military person, but I'm so wedded to the military, because that, you know, my husband, you know, has been in for as long as he has, and he continues to be, that you're never fully away from it. So it's a massive emotional pull. And I think it's hard either way, because I found it really hard living on a patch for various reasons, and then having to move every 2 years or less, you know, and pulling the kids out of schools, etc. And that weighed so heavy on me at the time when I lived in SFA. And I thought all those problems would go, because I'd be like, oh, I can just live, you know, but you can't, because military life follows you. Even though I'm not, myself and the kids aren't mobile now, my husband still is, and that is, you know, you're still not a family unit if they're not home. So yeah, I would say that it's one of those things where, as Lindsay said, with any professional, it's not about knowing exactly the circumstances and knowing everything about military life. You don't have to. It's more just kind of understanding that it's likely they have a very different life, and be willing to understand what that looks like at this moment in time. Because this time last year, my husband was just about to leave for 6 months. He's back now. So it's like, you know, had I been dealing with someone in the throes of that, my emotional state and my children's were very different to how they are now. And yeah, it's just being open to kind of understanding that they can't fix everything, but in whatever they are doing with the family, you know, to kind of understand and be willing to kind of bend, if they can, to how the particular family circumstances, whatever it may be, then that is so valuable. And, you know, it really, it's amazing, basically, to feel seen, and that, you know, in that way.
Yeah, and I mean, it is just so exhausting, like you're saying. And I suppose because you do have that feeling, because I was exactly saying, just I'm resonating with so much to what you're saying, Hannah. You think, oh, I'm not having to move again, and it's exhausting having to constantly make new friends, but then when you do step out of that, you know, it's exhausting as well when your partner is away, and you are like you said, you are the default parent. You've got to do dinner, you've got to do wake ups, you've got to do bedtime stories, you've got to do homework, you've got to do all of this. But then then they come back with all their kit, and it's everywhere, and there's washing, and it's just too much. So it can be exhausting. But also there's a grief, isn't there? Like, because you kind of miss just like popping over and say, oh, I need some sugar. I mean, that's a funny analogy, but that's true. I've done that many times. Or I need a toilet roll because we've just moved and I forgot to pack one, and it's somewhere in a box and I don't know where it is.
That resonates with me, because Lindsay and I were next door neighbours for a while.
Oh, amazing.
The back garden over the low fence with like some form of medical.
I think it was an onion at one point as well, wasn't there?
Yeah, actually touching on that, and with you know, this week particularly with the global events that are happening, like one thing I would say that is a massive difference is, I know, had, you know, we still lived next door to each other, we'd probably have had a chat on the way to school about it. It's like a kind of debrief from one 100%. Country to another. Here, I don't really know my neighbours. No, and I mean, I now have some lovely friends, you know, from we've lived here for nearly 3 years now, and I've built up relationships, but none of them are military. So it's very different conversations that you get. They're like, oh, what's going to happen? Have you heard? Because I'm, you know, like I have some deeper knowledge for what's going to happen. And actually, as a spouse, you don't want to be asked that, because actually what you're thinking is you just want to talk to someone and kind of, you know,
or moan about the what, moan
like,
about something. I bet.
So that is a different thing, and it's in patch life. I think if your neighbour's curtains, you know, if the curtains were still shut into the day, or if, you know, the recycling was full of wine bottles and stuff, you'd probably be more mindful to think, oh, you know, they might need a bit more help, they're struggling a bit more. Whereas in civilian life, if you live in a place that doesn't necessarily mean you've got, you know, loads of friends and family automatically there, then you haven't got anyone really checking in on you, especially if your spouse is away. So that is another layer of, you know, you're not necessarily gaining a support network, you're having to find one. Not to say that you can't find some lovely friends, but it's kind of, it is different. It's like the whole point of peer support is that you can talk to someone that actually absolutely lives and breathes and gets it. And when you live unaccompanied, you can miss that element. And it's valuable, you know, to have just, you know, someone that lives next door to you or just up the road that you see all the time, knows exactly. Yeah.
That's so interesting you're saying that, because when I FaceTime my friend in Oz, that's all we do is just moan. Just let it get off our chests.
Yeah. It's cathartic, definitely.
Yeah.
An important point on that is to kind of try reframing it as not moaning. Like, these are kind of little pressure valve moments whereby if we don't talk about these little things, then it builds up. It has a cumulative effect and a cumulative impact on you. And you know, people are internalizing those little things, and people are, you know, coping until they don't. And so actually, is it moaning, or is it just allowing people to have that emotional kind of pressure valve?
Yeah, it's so important, because it can explode.
So, be kinder to yourself. I don't always think of it as moaning.
Yeah, it's not moaning. We need to be more positive, and we're just debriefing.
Debriefing. Or mentally and emotionally downloading, and that kind of relational, that has a real relational benefit. Doing that, I think we often label it as moaning, but actually it's sharing the load. You know, in the small things, so that you can survive the bigger things.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh, it's just been so wonderful chatting to both of you, but I am conscious that we might have some questions, and I'll open up the conversation to some other people. So I'm just going to pop onto the chat. Does anyone have a question that they would like to ask Lindsay or Hannah? You can use the raise the hand function, or you can indeed just pop a question into the chat function. But if anyone would like to ask a question, please do raise your hand. Okay, we'll go to Lou first. Hello, Lou. I'll just
Hi.
Hi, there you go.
It was more, to be honest, it was more a comment than anything, than a question. And I really appreciate everything that's been said today. It's been a really interesting and valuable session, but it was just something that resonated with me that Lindsay mentioned, that parents have all the context. And I think that is such an important thing for us within education and learning to remember, because quite often it's a do-to rather than an in partnership. And it's something we certainly strive to get right in Highland, about that partnership. And I've taken that quote, parents have all the context, because it's so true. And I just wanted to say thank you for emphasizing that, because I think it's a nugget way of saying it. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Lou.
Thank you. And I would say that sometimes schools, Hannah and our children went to the same school, very heavily military dominated, and when those schools get it right, they really get it right, and that can be an enormous source of support for parents. And I think that's not just getting it right in terms of the children, but the school that we went to, Hannah and I, they were very, very mindful of how parents were experiencing things, and have that similar approach that they have to children, and understanding that behaviours are an expression of something deeper, having that same approach with the parents. and that emotional literacy with the children is, you know, you can use that same emotional literacy with the adults. And it can be really powerful when people, particularly schools, who we interface with a lot, for school-age children anyway. Same is true for, you know, nursery and childcare settings, I suppose too. Having that kind of approach is really beneficial.
Okay. We'll just go to AFF Health and Additional Support Needs. Sorry, I don't know your name.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, they won't give me my name. Karen Ross here. I'm the Health and Additional Needs Specialist, and I've spoken to Lindsay and team in the past, and I would just like to thank you for the support you're giving around perinatal mental health. I think it's really important as an ex-midwife, also ex-service midwife as well, many years ago. Just in my role as a health and additional needs specialist, obviously we see some very complex issues come our way, more and more complex as time goes on. We're an evidence-based organisation, so part of, although we do speak to families on a regular basis, our other work is policy related, so that we look at policy, both external and internal MOD policy, to see where improvement and change needs to be made. And I'm just wondering, you would be in receipt of some very rich data probably, and recognise themes and issues that families are having. Do you have somewhere where you can collate and collect and then present that information, or is this something that we could discuss if, you know, if there's a need to do that? Because I think that we don't speak to everyone, but, you know, because sometimes people just don't know we're here still, even though we have got quite a large footprint across the devolved administrations and overseas and back. And also you touched on overseas, and we're doing a project around overseas experiences at the VFFO project with the other FAMFEDs. So I think it's just how to capture some of the issues that families are having, because I think it's really important. And like I've said in the chat, and you said very eloquently, that a listening ear is really important, and not everyone needs things fixing. But if we can resolve things, it's even better, isn't it? And hopefully will improve things moving forward. So I'd just like to thank you for sharing your experiences. And I absolutely understand it. We did 30 years and we're just living in our own home after 30 years of military accommodation. So it is very strange.
That's great.
Yeah, so I think in answer to your question, we don't formally collect and collate that information, but we have over 3 years of, you know, listening to people via peer support. You know, there are some very obvious themes that kind of surface as a result of those conversations. And that's the beauty of being part of the likes of the Maternal Mental Health Alliance and the National Maternity and Neonatal Collective, is that we have been able to have conversations in those spaces and feed in those specific military parent specific challenges into that wider conversation. So I guess to answer your question, that we don't formally collect and collate it because, you know, we're a small voluntary funded organisation. We don't have the capacity to do that, but that, you know, we feel like there's a moral imperative there to not just sit with those, you know, very obvious systemic issues and not do anything with it, which is why being part of those wider alliances and collectives and feeding that in where we can has been really important to us.
That's great. Thank you so much. And we'll just go to Aldershot Nursery now. Sorry, I don't know your name. Apologies.
Hello. Hi. Sorry, I'm Michelle. I'm the deputy manager here for a nursery. It's a garrison nursery, so predominantly military children. I'm a military wife. I'm from Australia, so obviously a big move. Met a British man in the army, so moved over here. So very long way. My question is, you did mention that you are a small organisation. We have a lot of military families that have SEND children, obviously both serving. How are you working? Do you work with nurseries, or do you come out to nurseries, or can you come out to nurseries? Yeah, that's just a little question from me. So sorry for the Wizard of Oz today. It's World Book Day as well. So
Do you want to answer that one, Hannah?
So sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, my computer just did something funky. Currently we haven't really been dealing with nursery organisations. It's mainly been through parents, I mean, mainly mums, military spouses, but also serving spouses too, women, predominantly, but coming to us that way. I mean, we could always think about kind of doing that. Is there something in particular that you would you're seeing in kind of the families that are there at the nursery? Because I mean, I imagine they're dealing with deployments and separations, etc.
A lot of behavioural issues with children. You know, obviously first-time parents struggling, they don't know what to do. You know, there's all parents with SEND children, severely autistic children, that they both serving and they can't get time off work because, the child's having a meltdown at nursery and they can't leave. Like there's a lot of issues with that we are struggling with. So maybe having one of you guys come out to support, have a night for them to let it out or something. I don't know, something.
You can
what I would say to that is, sorry, Hannah. What I would say to that is, the moment we don't have the capacity to do that because we are, unfunded. All of the kind of financial support for what we do has either been fundraised on behalf of people that can see the value in what we do. They've fundraised on our behalf, which is paid for, overheads and for peer support, training, etc. And so that kind of hamstrings our capacity to do those things. But we have engaged with, health professionals or, education professionals ad hoc to be able to have those discussions, but not on any real formal basis. And I guess until we have any change in capacity in that respect, not just financial, but I guess in terms of like real logistical changes and, workforce, then our ability to do that, our capacity to do that will always remain limited. But we do what we can as powerfully as we can. So, having those conversations, if you've got someone that you feel really just needs somewhere to go, because they just need that emotional, like I was saying earlier, pressure valve download, then we can facilitate that. But it probably wouldn't be coming to them in person. It would be doing that via, the means and the mechanisms that we already do that with other parents.
Perfect. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
I've also just popped a wee link in there for there's some modules by Dr. Marg Rogers. She's actually based in Australia, and it's a fantastic resource that you could maybe direct parents towards. So there's individual modules for parents that they can look at as well. So that's just an additional resource that you could maybe share out with the parents and for the nursery itself. So that might be helpful. I think, if there's any other questions, I don't think there's any in the chat. I'm just having a check. Well, that's actually perfect, because that's just after 16 minutes. But what I would just like to say, Lindsay and Hannah, is just a massive thank you for joining us today. I feel it's been incredibly valuable just to have this conversation and open up the discussion. And I'm positive it has been very beneficial to the people that have been on the call. And I just want to thank you for your time, because I know how busy you are. What I would ask for our attendees today, I would be extremely grateful if you could please fill in a very short evaluation form. It will not take time at all. I've just popped it into the chat there. And I'd be really grateful if you could just fill that in, because that allows us to host more of these conversations. What I will also do in our follow-up email, as I said, this session has been recorded, but I'll pop in your information, Lindsay and Hannah, for anyone who does want to get in contact with you about any of the issues we've discussed today. But thank you so much, and it's been a really fantastic conversation, so thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah,
No,
thank you.
Thank you.